Chicago wanted him. He chose differently. Chicago doesn't just produce basketball players, it protects them. By the time Derrick Rose was dominating at Simeon Career Academy, the city had already claimed him. He wasn't just a high school star, he was Chicago's future. 4 state championships, packed gyms, national attention, college scouts lining the baseline. But locally, the conversation wasn't about whether he'd be great, it was about where he would stay. The University of Illinois felt like destiny. In-state powerhouse, Big Ten stage, familiar territory. The storyline wrote itself. Hometown legend stays home, leads Illinois, becomes state hero before going pro. It sounded perfect, but perfection and pressure often travel together, and pressure was building quietly. When a player is that talented, cities stop asking what's best for him. They start asking what's best for them. Illinois wasn't just recruiting Rose, they were recruiting expectation. Local fans talked about it like it was obvious. Reporters framed it like it was inevitable. It wasn't even framed as a decision, it was framed as a formality. But Derrick Rose was never loud, never dramatic, never someone who chased approval. While Chicago debated his future publicly, he stayed quiet. Then John Calipari stepped in. Calipari didn't pitch comfort, he pitched acceleration. Memphis wasn't home, it wasn't familiar, it wasn't sentimental, it was strategic. Calipari saw Rose not as a local symbol, but as a national weapon. His pitch wasn't about representing Chicago, it was about preparing for the NBA. Memphis offered a fast-paced system built for Rose's style, immediate leadership responsibility, national exposure, a direct path to becoming the #1 pick. Illinois offered legacy, Memphis offered launch. That's the difference. And when Rose chose Memphis, Chicago felt it. There wasn't outrage, but there was confusion. Why leave? Why not stay loyal? Why not build something here first? That's the tension hometown stars always face. When you grow up in a city, the city feels ownership. But ownership doesn't always align with ambition. Derrick Rose didn't hold an emotional press conference. He didn't defend his choice publicly. He just committed. And that quiet commitment told you something about his personality. He wasn't making a statement against Chicago. He was making a decision for himself. That distinction matters because the narrative afterward tried to frame it as departure, but in reality, it was development. Leaving Chicago didn't weaken his connection to the city. It strengthened it, because Memphis exposed him to something Illinois might not have accelerated as quickly: national spotlight pressure. Memphis wasn't just competitive, it was electric. High tempo, high stakes, high expectations. Rose wasn't hidden in a rebuilding program. He was handed control immediately, and that year would send him to the Final Four. But before we get there, understand this. The decision itself changed perception. Before Memphis, he was Chicago's best high school player. After committing to Memphis, he became a projected national star. Distance expanded his image, and sometimes stepping away from home is what prepares you to return stronger. That choice, Memphis over Illinois, seems simple now, but at the time it was identity-defining. He chose growth over comfort, strategy over sentiment, future over familiarity, and Chicago would eventually benefit from that decision more than anyone realized, because the version of Derrick Rose that came back to the NBA draft wasn't just a local hero anymore. He was the most explosive guard in the country, and that didn't happen by staying safe.
When Derrick Rose stepped onto the floor from Memphis, the conversation changed immediately. He wasn't Chicago's kid anymore. He was a freshman starting point guard on a team expected to compete nationally. That shift matters, because hometown legends carry reputation. National prospects carry scrutiny. Memphis, under John Calipari, wasn't a slow-build program. It was aggressive, tempo-driven, and unapologetically fast. The offense demanded control in chaos, quick decisions, explosive reads, transition command. Rose fit it instantly. His first few games didn't look like adjustment periods. They looked like escalation. He wasn't overwhelmed by the speed of Division I basketball. He dictated it. That's what separated him. Most freshmen react. Rose controlled. The pace Memphis played at required a point guard who could collapse defenses without over-dribbling. Rose's game was built for that. He didn't need isolation-heavy possessions to make impact. A single hesitation dribble could tilt the floor. Defenders couldn't stay in front. Big men struggled to hedge. Help rotations arrived late, and Memphis started winning a lot. The Tigers climbed rankings quickly. Rose wasn't just contributing, he was stabilizing. When games tightened, the ball stayed in his hands. When opponents pressured full court, he didn't rush. That composure elevated his draft stock rapidly. But the season wasn't just about highlights, it was about perception shift. Before Memphis, Rose was projected lottery talent. By mid-season, he was discussed as a potential #1 pick. That jump doesn't happen because of flash alone. It happens because executives see readiness. Rose looked NBA ready. His body control was mature. His finishing angles were advanced. His ability to split defenders in transition wasn't reckless, it was calculated. Calipari's system amplified his strengths. Instead of operating in half-court grind situations, Rose thrived in space, and space reveals explosiveness differently. It becomes lethal. By tournament time, Memphis wasn't a surprise team. They were a Final Four contender, and Rose wasn't a role player. He was the engine. The NCAA tournament magnifies everything. Weaknesses get exposed, stars get tested, and Rose passed both. In the Elite Eight against Texas, he delivered 21 points and 9 rebounds. In the Final Four, he led with confidence beyond his age. Even in the championship game against Kansas, where Memphis ultimately fell short in overtime, Rose looked composed. The free throw misses that haunted Memphis late in that title game weren't his, but the responsibility still felt collective. That's how leadership works. He wasn't the loudest voice on the roster, but when he walked off that floor, scouts weren't debating potential anymore. They were debating inevitability. The difference between Illinois and Memphis became clear in hindsight. Illinois might have built him into a star regionally. Memphis projected him nationally. His draft position solidified, and suddenly, the decision that once confused Chicago began to make sense. Because Memphis didn't disconnect him from home, it positioned him for return. Here's the irony. Had he stayed at Illinois, his path may have been steadier, but possibly slower. Memphis fast-tracked him. National TV exposure, deep tournament run, a system built around his skill set. By the end of that one season, Rose wasn't just a top prospect, he was the top prospect. The conversation shifted from where will he go in the lottery to who's getting lucky enough to draft him. And that's where fate quietly entered, because while Rose was reshaping his future in Memphis, Chicago was waiting. Not intentionally, but statistically. The Bulls had only a 1.7% chance at the #1 overall pick in 2008. 1.7%. That's not destiny, that's improbability. But improbability means nothing without preparation. If Rose doesn't go to Memphis, if he doesn't accelerate nationally, if he doesn't become consensus #1, the draft lottery miracle doesn't hit the same. His choice to leave Chicago made his return meaningful. It wasn't just hometown talent staying home. It was national star coming back. And that difference is powerful. Memphis didn't just develop his game, it elevated his presence. It gave Chicago a version of Derrick Rose that felt larger than regional pride. It gave them a franchise centerpiece.
And that started with a decision many didn't understand at first.
In sports, people love to call things destiny. But destiny without preparation is just coincidence. When the 2008 NBA draft lottery happened, the Chicago Bulls were not supposed to win it. They had a 1.7% chance. That's not likely. That's not probable. That's barely possible. And yet, when the envelopes were opened, Chicago landed the #1 overall pick. It felt poetic. Hometown star, hometown team, perfect alignment. But here's the part that gets overlooked. The alignment only mattered because Derrick Rose had already elevated himself to the clear top prospect in the country. If Rose had stayed at Illinois and developed at a slower pace, if he hadn't led Memphis to a national championship game, if he hadn't proven NBA readiness under Calipari's system, the Bulls winning the lottery wouldn't have guaranteed anything. They could have drafted another talent. They could have chosen differently. The narrative wouldn't have been as clean. Memphis transformed Rose from Chicago's best high school player into the consensus #1 pick. That distinction changed everything. Because when Chicago's improbable lottery win became reality, there was no debate, no hesitation, no overthinking. The pick was automatic: Derrick Rose. And suddenly, the decision that once frustrated parts of the city became the reason the reunion felt powerful. If he had never left, there would have been no separation, no growth arc, no national validation. His departure made his return meaningful. That's the irony. Chicago didn't just draft a local hero. They drafted a nationally validated star who happened to be local. That hits differently, because when hometown talent stays home from the beginning, it feels expected. When hometown talent leaves, grows, dominates nationally, and then returns by fate, it feels earned. The city didn't just get one of its own, it got the best player in the draft. The Memphis year wasn't a detour, it was a launch pad. And the lottery miracle wasn't destiny, it was timing meeting preparation. Rose's recruitment decision altered that timing. It compressed his development. It forced him into national competition immediately. It removed the safety net of local comfort, and it made him undeniable. By draft night, there was no suspense. Chicago wasn't choosing between options. They were completing a circle. And circles feel powerful in sports. But circles don't close cleanly without tension first. That tension began the day he chose Memphis.
There's a misconception about loyalty. People assume staying equals loyalty, but sometimes leaving builds something stronger. When Derrick Rose chose Memphis over Illinois, some fans questioned it. Years later, that question feels irrelevant because the departure didn't weaken his bond with Chicago identity. When Rose entered the NBA, he wasn't just the Simeon kid. He was the #1 overall pick. He was nationally tested. He had carried a Final Four team. He had faced elite competition nightly. That preparation showed immediately in his rookie season. He didn't look overwhelmed. He didn't look cautious. He looked ready. And readiness matters when a franchise hands you the keys. Chicago didn't draft potential. They drafted readiness. And readiness was forged outside the city. That's why this recruitment decision matters. Not because it sparked controversy, but because it shaped trajectory. Had Rose stayed at Illinois, perhaps the path would still have led him to Chicago, but it may not have been as sharp, not as accelerated, not as inevitable. Memphis didn't just prepare him for the NBA, it prepared him to lead Chicago immediately. And leadership at 19 isn't common. That level of control requires experience under bright lights. Memphis provided that. So when he returned to Chicago on draft night, the story wasn't about unfinished loyalty. It was about fulfilled growth. He didn't reject Chicago, he prepared for it. That's the difference. Sometimes cities want ownership too early. They want the star before the star is finished forming. Rose understood something instinctively. growth sometimes requires departure. And when he came back wearing Bulls red, the city didn't feel betrayed, it felt lucky. Because what they got wasn't just their own, it was the best version of their own. That doesn't happen without risk. That doesn't happen without choosing differently. So when people look back and say, Chicago wanted him, he chose differently, they miss the second half of the story. He chose differently so he could return stronger. And that recruitment decision, quiet, strategic, misunderstood at first, set the foundation for everything that followed. From rookie playoff debut to MVP at 22, to becoming the face of a franchise, it started with leaving. And sometimes, leaving is the most loyal thing you can do.